Good evening, everybody, and welcome to our first Renew Facebook Live event of 2021. Hope you all had a good new year and hope you are all well. So joining me this evening, as ever, we have Renew's leader, James Clarke.
Hello, everyone. Hi, Jim. Hi, Heather. Hi, Carla.
And we also have Renew's deputy leader, Carla Burns.
Good evening, everyone.
And special guest this evening is Jim Adcock.
Good evening, all.
Evening, Jim. So first of all, let's come to Jim and let's introduce him to our audience. Jim, can you just tell us a little bit about you and your involvement with Renew, please?
Okay, since I lived in France for 5 years and came back in 2013. Since then, I've been freelancing as a business consultant, helping small businesses, and as in interim management. As far as Renew is concerned, I saw James and his colleague James Torrance on BBC Look East early in 2018. Sounded interesting. Looked them up on the website, but didn't do any more about it at that time. In March of that year, I bumped into a good friend of my new son-in-law at my daughter's wedding in Worcestershire, a guy called Luke Shaw, who'd already signed up and joined Renew. And my daughter introduced us, and we were stood, before the dancing started, I would add, middle of the dance floor, talking politics. So I looked into Renew again after that, came down, I think, for one of the early People's Vote marches and joined up. And I think I spoke with James and offered to help in the east of England. I live near Norwich now, as there was nothing really happening in that area. So I volunteered to help. And I think probably autumn of that year, we had our first meeting, if I remember rightly, in Ipswich, to sort of try and kickstart things a little bit in the east of England. Why Renew? I've always been interested in politics, but I've never got engaged until the famous referendum of 2016, something I felt very strongly about. And the first time in my life, I've actually got out on the streets campaigning and talking to people, leafleting and knocking on doors. Obviously not very happy with the result. And the opportunity, I came across Renew. I would never join one of the main parties. Looked at that many years ago in response to a planning application where I lived in Kent at the time, and it was clearly corrupt. And I thought about standing for local council, and in reality, I would have been an independent, and it would have been pointless. And there was no way I was going to join one of the three main parties. So that was as far as I got. But Renew was just a different opportunity. You know, the whole concept of people from outside politics fitted very well. You know, that's how I felt. And I've got involved. Certainly, I think into 2019, got involved down at Newport and did some campaigning there, and certainly quite a bit more at Peterborough, because it was nearer to home for me. Quite enjoyed it, I must admit. There's not much opportunity for the street campaigning at the moment, but it'll come back.
Well, we're very glad to have you on board, Jim. And perhaps, you know, we've all been searching to find what this particular benefit to Brexit is. And perhaps it's the fact that we've got people like you involved in politics. Perhaps that is the one Brexit that the one benefit to Brexit that we can actually celebrate.
Well, that's the first one I've heard.
Indeed. Well, on that subject, since this is our first chat of the new year, it's our first discussion since we officially left the European Union. So now we know some of the realities of that. I thought it might be quite a good idea just to go round and ask you all what your thoughts are on how it's going so far. So how about I come to you first, James? What are your thoughts? How's it going?
Well, it's nothing really unexpected. It was obvious that there would be bottlenecks and problems in the short term and perhaps even longer term. If you look at the the news today, you'll see that the UK derivatives market is losing pace to the US and the Netherlands. British touring bands are going to have an awful lot of trouble touring once that's allowed again. Unilateral withdrawal from the Boeing Airbus deal in the hope of a UK-US trade deal has backfired, and we're looking at 25% tariffs on Scotch whiskey, and rotting food and fish and meat. And that's just in January. So I think we're at I don't know if you call it a watershed moment, but we're at a moment where those of us who've been saying that Brexit was a bad idea for 4 or 5 years don't really need to do that anymore. It's becoming, reality is biting. And the good thing, I suppose, is that the news media are reporting on Brexit issues in a far more realistic way, and not on a leave remain axis, on the sense of how it's affecting people's lives and businesses. So I think we're dealing with reality now, rather than, passion and identity and bitterness and antagonism. And hopefully we'll be able to work politically to address and fix those problems with a focus on, as I say, reality rather than identity and ideology.
Yeah, that's an interesting point, James. So you feel like the media are now doing a better job of telling us the facts?
Yeah, I mean, the final fact of our departure from the EU can be regretted, but it cannot be denied. So we're able to look at it in a very clear-eyed way and not fall back on something must be good because it's a leave thing, or it must be bad because it's a leave thing. I think we're beyond that, and I think it's an opportunity to move forward and fix actual problems and propose solutions.
Yeah, now I'm going to come to you, Carla. For those who haven't met Carla before, Carla is one of our fabulous NHS workers, and so yes, of course, I will be asking you about COVID in a moment. But before we come on to that, people were very worried about the impact of Brexit on medicine supply and such like. How is that side of things going? Have you noticed any issues there so far?
Not that I've been made aware of, not that's come onto my agenda at the moment. I think COVID is having a bigger impact in the shorter term. My understanding is there's been a lot of coordination happening at national level around medicines, etc. But I do know that during the first wave of the pandemic, many trusts were very, very close to running out of certain drugs, particularly anaesthetic drugs, and also, unbelievably, oxygen. And we, certainly in the organisation I work in, had introduced something called oxygen husbandry, which I'd not heard of before, but the whole concept of managing very, very carefully oxygen flows, because NHS trusts aren't used to having a significant proportion of their patients requiring oxygen. And of course, the impact of COVID is that demand has significantly increased. So I'm not hearing that Brexit is impacting just yet. However, I have a feeling some of my colleagues may not be the first to tell me of Brexit impacts, knowing my views.
And so what are your thoughts, Jim? What have you seen from a more general business perspective?
I think I agree with James. I mean, basically, Project Fear has become Project Reality now, and people can see it. And I think the opportunity for me, it crystallizes the incompetence in the current government. You know, they've made promises, none of which have been kept. They've spent an awful lot of money on Brexit planning. I'm glad I've got older daughters who live in Kent. I wouldn't want to be living in Kent at the moment. You know, they've supposedly got all the plans in place, but none of them are working. You know, the IT isn't working. It's a long way off. And for me, the opportunity, if you like, for ourselves, is to point out the failure and the opportunities that have been missed, and the incompetence, which frankly, I think just pervades throughout the whole government. And that's a really big thing.
Yeah, I mean, obviously it may be because we're dealing with COVID at the moment as well, but it seems to me like we're not hearing as much about Brexit as we might be at this point in time.
I think particularly at the cross border, it's still low volumes.
Right.
I think that's the reality. You know, a lot of overseas companies and overseas hauliers are just not coming. And the biggest worry is that they might continue to not come. You know,
Well, once they get used to doing something different, perhaps they might stay with that, do you think?
Yeah. Particularly if they're sourcing products from the UK, how long will they wait before they source an alternative product from Europe, or that can be brought into Europe?
There's probably not that many products that are unique to the UK that can't be sourced elsewhere. I'm thinking Scotch whisky might be all right, but
It's a massive industry, isn't it?
Yeah.
it's huge.
And growing. The other one,
And growing because of lockdown, because we're all consuming more alcohol in lockdown.
one of the success stories of lockdown, strong alcohol consumption has gone up dramatically. Perhaps not so much for Carla's work, though.
I couldn't possibly comment. What I would say is I think you've picked on a really good point there, Heather, around sources of news and information. And I have friends in Europe who are alarmed really at the stories that they're seeing and hearing, and our response being that, well, we're not really seeing and hearing those stories. And I've got a number of EU friends who live in the UK who are returning to their originating countries' news sources to hear something more uplifting, to hear something more honest, to hear something more balanced, because they're not of the view that what we're getting through our current channels is accurate.
And I mean, it seems that you watch Sky News and you turn on to BBC, and it's the same people being interviewed one after the other on the different news channels. So there's very little difference between what you're hearing on our British news channels at the moment, I feel.
Yeah, I would agree. And I think the only positive to come out of that is Nigel Farage has not been seen for a while, from what I understand.
It was on Radio 2 at lunchtime.
Oh, there we go.
Sorry.
Broken cover.
Yeah. On Jeremy Vine's show. And I thought, goodness, why do we need to hear from Farage? You know, his opinion is worthless now. But it's easy, it's lazy journalism, to be honest. And that's a big problem.
He guarantees an audience, doesn't he? Because he's, you know, you sort of, I guess you love him or you hate him. So people tune in for perhaps one or other of those reasons.
It's probably worth mentioning on that topic the disappointing news we received from the Electoral Commission. For those of you who are not aware, we officially disputed Farage's decision to rebrand the Brexit Party as Reform UK. And we provided numerous examples of potential voter confusion, which were already happening. Heather, you remember?
Yeah, there were loads. There were so many people coming in saying, oh, you know, I thought you were Nigel's lot. Oh, okay, since you're not, I'll talk to you.
And those are just the examples where people have told us. We don't even know how many have had that impression and not let us know.
Right.
So after I think 8-9 weeks, after looking at the evidence, they decided that it was okay for Reform UK and Renew UK, whose logos are quite similar, and they've even stolen our turquoise colouring. And it's a terrible shame, and another example of how the system is rigged in favour of the established parties at the expense of the grassroots, and it's a terrible shame. We've also made a similar dispute on Lawrence Fox and his reclaim, and we're waiting to hear from them. But if they're going to allow reform, I can only imagine they'll allow reclaim, which will again be a terrible disappointment to us who've worked so hard to build Renew as a brand, to essentially be stomped all over by the very organisation that's supposed to look after democratic interests and prevent this sort of thing happening.
Yeah, I mean, you're right, James. It is disappointing for us, but I think even, you know, what worries us more is the situation that it leaves voters in, because when you get to the point of having a ballot paper, the R section of the ballot paper becomes quite confused when you've got reclaim, reform, renew. It will be very easy for people to pick the wrong party.
Of course, when we all stand next, we'll be at the top of the ballot because we have Astbury, Adcock, Burns and Clarke. So
that's the way around it.
That's our advantage.
That's it. Choose candidates carefully.
I have to say that was I was really impressed to see my name at the top of the ballot paper, and I have no doubt there will be people who will just think, I'll just tick the first candidate on the box. And, you know, whilst that might not be ideal, it certainly goes in our favour. And I think the thing for me is remembering the new part in our name. It's renew, and the whole idea of doing something new, not just rehashing what already exists or reforming what's already there. Some of the things that we will need to achieve will require starting again and really kind of shaking things up in a way that hasn't been done or isn't being proposed by some of these new parties.
Well, elections, while we're on the subject of elections, we need to talk about the US election and the fact that there has been a dark cloud over Washington that has finally lifted with the fact that there is a new inhabitant of the White House. Well done, America!
Yeah.
Finally, sense has prevailed. So, but what do we think that means for our relationship with the US? And I'm going to come to you first, Jim, on this one this time. What do you think it's going to mean for us going forward?
I think you've got a much easier president to deal with for a start. We've got more common goals, hopefully, on things like climate change. He's already made an excellent first step on that. So I think that will continue. I think we should just be cautious about thinking it'll automatically give us this wonderful trade deal that we were hoping for. I think he'll be quite circumspect about that, and I don't think that's automatic. And I think he will, the issue with Ireland, and I think given the problems we've got with shipments and products getting into Northern Ireland at the moment, that's not going to be a quiet environment for the next few months. So I think that will come into play in terms of trade talks, because Biden is very pro-Ireland.
Yeah, he was very concerned about the suggestion that we might be willing to break international law and jeopardise the Good Friday Agreement, wasn't he?
Yeah. I think I almost felt quite emotional listening to the inauguration yesterday, partly thinking, well, couldn't that be us?
I think many of us thought that as well, Jim. I
I
feel like our turn will come.
Yeah, I think I'd hope that Biden is a fairly honest and decent man, you know, as you can be to reach the top in American politics. But I think he'll do as best he can what he says he'll do, and I think that's as much as you can hope for.
Yeah, I think you're right. I think one of the things that strikes me most about him, and you know, he's perhaps not the perfect candidate, but then who is ever the perfect candidate? But what strikes me about him is he strikes me as a kind man.
Yeah, I think you're right.
And I think kindness in politics is something that we're sorely missing here. We were missing it in America, and it would be perhaps nice to see America lead the way on that front. What do you think about that, Carla?
I think you've made a really, really good point. There's this almost old-fashioned view of power and people who wield power as needing to be iron-fisted and to administer cruel policies. And I think there are more and more examples of where kindness is showing us the way. I think, you know, the New Zealand example of really exemplary leadership in the response to COVID. I think, you know, kindness is hugely underrated, and it's you know, when you talk about people being kind, sometimes it's the most difficult thing to do, because it means you have to have difficult conversations. It means you have to call out things as they are. It means you have to embrace things that are difficult. So I think there's huge opportunities, and I think seeing some of the initial acts that Biden has undertaken in a very short space of time, looking at the people he's appointing to support him, significant representation from people of colour, from people from various different backgrounds, that can only take us forward in terms of a kinder type of politics, and hopefully start to burst the bubble of populism that we are subject to at the moment.
And James, we've talked a lot about the necessary trade deal between the UK and the US, with Brexit being out of the window. I mean, where do you think the Biden presidency is going to take us on that front? I mean, the relationship is not going to be as cozy, perhaps, between Johnson and Biden as it was with Trump.
That's right. With the best will in the world, I do not think a UK trade deal is in the top 10 or even top 20 priorities for the Biden administration. And we wouldn't expect it to be. The same issues that we would have had with Trump, we'll have with Biden over, you know, access to the NHS, food standards, et cetera, et cetera. It's a matter of national interests, and the fact is that the US and the UK national interests overlap to a limited extent, but not perhaps as much as we would have liked, in order to compensate for the loss of trade with the EU. Now, with the relationship with Biden and Johnson, a lot has been written on there. There may well be a slight personality clash between the two. I don't think we can expect the closeness of the personal relationship to be anything like Thatcher and Reagan, for example, or even Blair and Bush. It may be more of a parallel with a Cameron-Obama type relationship while that lasted, where there was, you know, a cool relationship, not especially warm, but perhaps enough to get things done. Let's see, and let's be hopeful about that.
The other thing with Biden, actually, it does give hope to older candidates.
Absolutely.
And with Kamala, as
I was looking younger this week as well.
I was just going to say, with the vice president being a woman, it also gives inspiration to female candidates.
Quite right.
Yes, and those of other origins as well. It's just great to see it's not all the white middle class male, or the WASPs as they were in America.
The inauguration ceremony, if you watched it, I sat and watched most of it whilst working, was quite extraordinary. You know, the performances, the names that showed up, the poetry, the enormous pomp ceremony and patriotism and hope that and passion that they managed to generate. It's often a quite, you know, inspiring spectacle, and it was quite clear that they have a very diverse group of people backing them, and it's not just all about Joe Biden.
The relationship with Johnson is going to be interesting, because now one is a grown-up.
We couldn't possibly say which one that is, Jim, could we?
I'll leave that to you.
Yeah. But I did think that the inauguration was such a stark contrast from the last inauguration. I mean, especially given the times that the inauguration took place within, in that people couldn't go, couldn't be there. It still seemed more to have more life about it and more excitement. And
Yeah,
as you
but
said, James,
fabulously,
a great range of people turning out to show their support.
it was fabulously choreographed. And to give tomorrow's briefing a plug, I mentioned the stark contrast in the performers that were attracted to perform at the 2021 compared to the 2017 inauguration, where everyone from Elton John to Celine Dion to Kid Rock all refused Trump's invitation, much to his ire. And he ended up asking a Bruce Springsteen tribute act to play, and they turned him down at the last minute for fear of their professional reputation. So it was quite an astonishing contrast.
Well, it was a president tribute act after all.
Very, very true.
Well, look, we are running out of time, believe it or not, people, and we can't finish tonight without, I'm afraid, returning to the very serious subject of COVID, when we have Carla particularly here because of Carla's insights into what's going on in the NHS. So, Carla, you're based in a hospital in Liverpool. Liverpool's had a rough time of it. How are things at the moment?
They are extremely challenging, probably the most challenged my colleagues have ever been in the NHS. We have more COVID patients than we did back in the second wave in October, and we are having to redeploy resources accordingly to do whatever we can to support the frontline clinical staff. So it's pretty grim, and it's difficult to see light at the end of the tunnel. The vaccine programme has been a huge boost for colleagues, but that has taken significant numbers of staff to coordinate. We've got volunteers supporting, and at one point we're vaccinating 1,000 people a day, which is an absolutely phenomenal achievement given the circumstances, given everything that that the NHS is going through right now. Everyone has pulled out all the stops. So significant achievement has given staff a boost. But then, you know, we are still getting occasions of colleagues being admitted with COVID, which is hugely challenging for people to deal with. We still have rising numbers of cases. I think we're anticipating a peak of next week for us here in Liverpool. Generally, we're a couple of weeks behind London, or certainly we're in the first wave, and that pattern appears to have been sustained. So incredible pressure, limited light at the end of the tunnel, and you know, there's going to be a significant fallout both operationally in terms of the work that will need to continue for elective procedures, etc., that perhaps are not happening at the moment, and also the psychological impact. I think we can't underestimate what's going to be happening. We talk about moral injury to healthcare professionals when they're having to make judgments based on the resources available to them, and some of those judgments will leave them feeling morally injured for a long time to come.
I think that's such a desperately cruel position to put healthcare professionals into, isn't it? Because they've gone into the profession they've gone into because they want to help people, and to then be forced to potentially not treat somebody because they don't have the resources to do it, that must just be horrific to deal with.
It is, and you know, in some instances that, you know, there is psychological support available to people who are feeling distressed, but like you say, this is not a position that we ever should have been in, and I think that's the bit that adds insult to injury when we look at the response that other countries have had and the position that we've found ourselves in. There were a number of political choices that have led us to where we are. This was not an inevitability, and I think that's one of the things that is most galling for NHS staff.
Do you think that we're doing enough to recognise the NHS and the NHS staff as humans who are suffering themselves. Because it strikes me somewhat that we talk about numbers a lot, but I don't know that we talk enough about the actual impact that this has on the professionals, because we sort of assume it's their job. But this isn't. This is so far above and beyond their job, right?
Absolutely. I think there is starting to be a recognition of the fact that they're human beings, and I think there was a lot of hero narrative that was prevalent at the first wave and even into the second wave, and that has been challenging for those individuals because they're not heroes, they're healthcare professionals. Their job is to administer healthcare, and the fact that they've had to behave heroically in a lot of circumstances has been a huge challenge for them, and they just want to be treated like the professional human beings that they are. I think recognition is increasing, the whole hero narrative is reducing. I saw that there was an attempt to reignite the clap for carers on the Thursday evening, which certainly, as far as I'm aware, didn't really gain any traction and caused a little bit of tension really between people saying, I don't want you to clap for me, I want you to vote for politicians that will prioritise healthcare and the NHS. I want you to prioritise ensuring that we have the resources available to deliver healthcare to the population. So, you know, I think it's helping shift the narrative to where it needs to be. It's focusing on where is the accountability, what do we prioritise as a country, and how do we treat people who work in our public services.
Well, and I know it's putting an additional burden on people who are already massively overburdened, but I, for one, am insanely grateful that it's the NHS that is doing the vaccination programme and not the people that are in charge of test and trace or whatever.
Exactly, which is why we've got the rapid numbers that we've got. We've got the local infrastructure, we've got the local knowledge and understanding. We are able to respond quickly when we're given the resource to do so. And the NHS is seeing resource to some degree being allocated to COVID, which is freeing us up to get on with and do what we do best.
Is there any concern with the efficacy data coming out of Israel with just giving one dose? They're talking about 35% only, which is lower than we were all expecting from the first dose.
So the information that we're being given, the official information, is that the first dose gives up to 90% efficacy, and that's the line that we're being given. And I can't answer that question. I don't know. I've been privileged enough to have my first dose of the vaccine, and my next appointment is in 12 weeks time. So I think there are concerns about efficacy. There are concerns about virus mutating and becoming resistant to the vaccine. I'd be interested to see what Independent Sage have got to say about this going forward, because they're certainly a resource group that I pay attention to when I'm looking at how I formulate my views and opinions.
Well, look, we are unfortunately slightly over time tonight, so I'm going to have to cut it short there now. I could talk to you all for hours because these are fascinating subjects and you're fascinating people to talk to. But thank you very much, all three of you, for joining me tonight.
Pleasure.
Thank you.
And I look forward to talking to you all again soon.
One last thing. Just want to say good luck to my mum Sue, who's getting her jab tomorrow lunchtime.
Hey, good luck,
Good luck, Sue.
Good luck. It hardly hurts.
Okay. Good night, everyone.
Good night, everybody.
Night all.